Here's where Vito made a rare yet deadly mistake. There was one big blunder that we can't avoid. Vito sending Luca Brasi straight to Sollozzo was a classic case of overconfidence. A bold move, sure, but a real misstep from a man who should have known better. I mean, to me at least, it made zero sense, none at all. But since we're going to go a bit hard on the Godfather himself, I think it's worth adding some much-needed context. This whole thing started with Vito thinking he could use Luca to play the part of a guy fed up with the family, ready to jump ship. The idea was simple: get in Sollozzo's ear, earn his trust, and figure out what he was planning. It makes sense, right? Except there was one massive flaw. We'll get into that, but here's the details that almost nobody ever points out. It's only when you look into it deeper, you give the Don a bit more credit, and the plan is slightly more well thought out. First of all, it's not as quick as the film makes it out to be. You see, Luca, over the course of several months, frequented one of Bruna Tattaglia's clubs, where during that time hinted he was not too happy in the Corleone family. The deal wasn't just money. It involved becoming a capo and reaching a higher rank. As he put it, the Don had reserved these high positions for his sons. And add to this deception, he made it a point that he would not go against Vito, an attempt to make his new career with the Tattaglias more palatable. But again, there was simply one problem. Luca Brasi was the most loyal enforcer in the game, a guy so deadly and cold-blooded, people whispered his name like it was a ghost story. But here's the kicker: this is the same guy who trembled and stuttered in Vito's presence out of pure reverence for his Don. And with that in mind, Vito thought Sollozzo would believe this guy'd flip for what, a few extra bucks? Sollozzo's no fool. He saw through that act before Luca even sat down. Now, to be fair, Luca did his part well. He walked in there, played the role like a pro. He wasn't too obvious about it and played hard to get. But let's be real, the mistake belongs to Vito. Sollozzo was smart, cunning, and ruthless. And when he saw the setup, he didn't hesitate. He flipped the whole game on Vito. Luca walked into that meeting with no backup, no escape plan, and no chance. Sollozzo made sure of that. He who plans but does not adapt to circumstances is doomed to failure. Plan for what is difficult while it is easy. Do what is great while it is small. Now, that loyalty made him predictable. In this business, predictable gets you killed. Sollozzo didn't need to be a genius to figure it out. The whole thing was doomed from the start. This deadly assumption underestimated Sollozzo's cunning and willingness to strike first, as Sollozzo turned the situation into an opportunity to eliminate one of Vito's most valuable assets. Let's be real, Luca had no reason to switch sides. He was well paid, respected, and feared. Money wasn't going to tempt him, and Sollozzo knew it. A good spy game relies on believability, and this one didn't have it. Maybe if Vito had sent Clemenza or Tessio, the act could have been more convincing. But even that came with risks. How could Vito be sure they wouldn't flip if the stakes got too high? It was a dangerous gamble, and Vito wasn't willing to bet on anyone but Luca. This misstep also shows how deeply rooted Vito was in old-school mafia thinking. In his world, reputation and loyalty carried immense weight. But Sollozzo wasn't playing by those rules. He represented a new generation of gangsters, bold, ambitious, and ruthless. Vito failed to see that his methods were becoming outdated, and it cost him. Vito's mistake wasn't just tactical. It was a sign that the game had changed, and for once, Vito wasn't ready for it. But let's dig deeper. If Vito had approached the situation differently, smarter moves could have been made. There were more subtle ways to get the same results without exposing Luca. Using lower-profile associates to sniff around or plant misinformation in Sollozzo's network could have kept the Corleones in control. A layered approach would have left Sollozzo guessing and avoided putting such a valuable asset in harm's way. Here's where Vito made another critical miscalculation. He didn't realize this wasn't just business as usual. Sollozzo wasn't there to negotiate. This was life or death. He saw the Corleones as the biggest obstacle to his narcotics empire, and he was prepared to take them out. Vito underestimated how far Sollozzo was willing to go, treating him like any other rival. That mistake left the Corleones vulnerable and Sollozzo with the upper hand. Sollozzo didn't just see through the plan, he turned it into an opportunity to eliminate one of Vito's most valuable assets. The lesson? Don't rely solely on bold moves without considering the risks. Strategic plans must include contingencies to address the unexpected. But Vito's miscalculations go far deeper. You see, although Vito's reputation as the Godfather was unmatched, in the past, his name alone had been enough to prevent rivals from challenging him directly, as they feared both his influence and the loyalty of his allies. But this reliance on reputation made him blind to the growing boldness of his enemies. But here's the thing, reputation can only protect you so much. He believed that his status alone would deter rivals from making bold moves against him. Sollozzo, however, wasn't intimidated. Vito's failure to see that his title didn't make him untouchable was a key mistake. He failed to realize the danger of a new rising generation of ambitious gangsters looking to shake things up. Similar to how a young Vito himself was not deterred by the fearsome reputation of the Black Hand. He saw an opportunity to challenge and dismantle an established power structure. The same boldness is what the new generation of gangsters like Sollozzo embodied, and Vito failed to recognize that he was now the one becoming challenged in the same way he had once defied his own rivals. In the world of power, respect and fear have their limits, especially when ambition comes knocking. By underestimating how far Sollozzo was willing to go to push his narcotics empire, Vito left himself exposed. Ambition like Sollozzo's doesn't stop at a polite no. It forces you to adapt or risk being left behind. He was too slow to respond, and as Sollozzo mentions, he caught him slipping. Now, the Corleone family's strength was built around Vito's leadership and influence, but that's also where its vulnerability lay. Vito relied too heavily on his own abilities and decisions, creating a power vacuum when he was removed from the equation. Once he was out of commission, the family was left scrambling, exposed to external threats and internally divided. A true leader doesn't just lead, they build a structure that can survive without them. Vito's failure to create a self-sustaining system made the Corleone family dangerously dependent on his presence. But to be fair, his sons weren't ready. In fact, his sons were a key reason they found themselves in this vulnerable position. If the heir to the throne was the one who messed up, how was he meant to delegate even more responsibility to him? But with all that in mind, let's be practical and explore how Don Vito could have played this. What Vito should have done. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. Looking back, there were smarter ways Vito could have played this. Let's break down what he could have done differently to protect the Corleones and turn the tables on Sollozzo. And for those who know strategy, Sun Tzu's The Art of War has plenty to say about how Vito could have approached this. 1. Don't refuse straight away. First mistake, Vito shut Sollozzo down immediately. Sure, he wanted to stay true to his principles, but in a game like this, timing's everything. Sun Tzu says, "He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight." Refusing outright gave Sollozzo no choice but to act quickly and aggressively. Why? Well, Vito was the essential piece in this new venture. Without Vito's connections, he would be building on an unstable foundation. Instead, Vito should have strung him along, pretend to consider the offer, buy time. By playing the diplomat, Vito could have created the illusion of negotiation while quietly gathering intel on Sollozzo's alliances and strategies. Vito's refusal was rooted in his belief that drugs would alienate his political allies. But here's the thing. A more calculated delay could have bought him some critical time, giving him the chance to gather intel and figure out just how deep Sollozzo's connections ran. 2. Eliminate Sollozzo early. Another option, Vito could have taken Sollozzo out before he even had the chance to make his move. You know, like Sun Tzu says, attack him where he's unprepared, appear where you are not expected. Sollozzo wasn't some nobody looking to cut a deal, he was a shark, circling the waters waiting for the right moment to strike. A preemptive strike wouldn't have just sent a message, it would have shut the whole operation down before it could even start, silencing anyone who wanted to bring this dirty business to the forefront. No Sollozzo, no narcotics empire, no Tattaglia alliance. Vito missed his chance to cut the head off the snake, and that's when things start spiraling out of control. 3. Tighten security. Then there's the issue of security. Vito got too comfortable, thinking his reputation alone would keep him safe. That was his first mistake. Like Sun Tzu says, in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. And Sollozzo, he saw the cracks in Vito's defenses and pounced. I mean, Vito's security detail was comprised of Paulie and Fredo. Do I need to say anything more? Vito had a well-laid-out routine which turned into the perfect setup for an ambush. Here's the thing, Vito should have tightened things up. More guards, tighter schedules, better communication in the family. Hell, even changing his routine now and then could have thrown Sollozzo off his game. Sun Tzu also says, "He who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not will be victorious." If Vito had been sharper about his defenses, Sollozzo would have had to think twice before making his move. 4. Control the battlefield. Sun Tzu says, "The clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him." And what did Vito do? He refused Sollozzo outright and didn't plan for the backlash. That gave Sollozzo the upper hand, plain and simple. Here's the thing, Vito could have flipped the script. Instead of letting Sollozzo dictate the terms, he should have drawn him into a setting where the Corleones held all the cards. A staged negotiation maybe, or a calculated ambush that reminded everyone why the Corleones were untouchable. Sollozzo's boldness, backed by the Tattaglias, and as we later find out the much more powerful Barzinis, blindsided Vito. If he'd taken control of the battlefield, this whole thing could have played out differently. Conclusion. Vito's mistakes weren't just tactical, they were a failure to adapt to a new kind of threat. Sollozzo wasn't playing by the old rules, and Vito didn't adjust in time. Sun Tzu's wisdom teaches us that strategy isn't just about reacting, it's about anticipating and controlling the flow of events. By stalling, eliminating the threat early, tightening security, or controlling the battlefield, Vito could have turned the tables and shifted the balance of power back in his favor. But in this business, even a Don can't afford to slip. Sure, hindsight is easy, but let's step back and see why Vito's moves might have made sense at the time. Now, saying things like Vito should or even could have predicted all of this would have happened is simply just lazy. Not here. Let's leave that to those Struns channels. First off, refusing Sollozzo outright wasn't some snap decision, it was calculated. Vito knew what narcotics meant. Drugs weren't like gambling or unions. They brought heat, the kind that could unravel everything he'd built. He spent years cultivating political allies who wouldn't want their names tied to dirty money. By shutting Sollozzo down right away, Vito was making a statement. The Corleones weren't about to compromise their empire for fast cash. And Sollozzo, he was risky, too bold, too aggressive. Giving him even a little leverage could have been dangerous for the family. Now, about not taking Sollozzo out early. It's easy to say Vito should have pulled the trigger first, but let's be real here. He didn't have all the information. He didn't know about the Barzinis pulling strings in the background. Making a move without that intel, that's how wars start. Vito's whole approach was about the long game. He didn't do preemptive strikes unless it was absolutely necessary, and at the time, he probably thought diplomacy might still work. And yeah, his security could have been tighter, no argument there, but for years his reputation alone kept him untouchable. Nobody messed with the Corleones. Sollozzo's boldness? That was the exception, not the rule. Sure, looking back, more guards or changing his routine might have made a difference, but for Vito, that kind of overkill probably felt unnecessary. And about letting Sollozzo dictate the battlefield, that wasn't just a mistake, it was Vito's confidence in his own position. He probably thought Sollozzo's aggression would backfire, exposing him as reckless to the other families. In Vito's mind, the Corleones had the moral high ground. He believed that mattered. But yeah, the cost of that belief turned out to be way higher than anyone expected. Now let's not forget, Vito had his reasons. The man was a master of the long game, and his refusal to engage in the narcotics trade wasn't just about principles, it was strategic. Drugs brought heat, the kind of attention that could destroy everything he'd built. Vito knew that moving into narcotics could alienate his political allies and tarnish the Corleone name, which had always been built on quieter, more respectable enterprises. And when you look at it from his perspective, shutting down Sollozzo outright was about maintaining control. He didn't want to give Sollozzo even the illusion of power within his family's operations. Vito was playing to protect the foundation of his empire, even if it meant misjudging the lengths Sollozzo was willing to go. Chapter 6: Consequences. This wasn't your typical mob sit-down. It was a high-stakes power play where every word, every gesture was a loaded consequence. What followed wasn't just fallout. It was an inferno that consumed lives and forever altered the course of the Corleone family. And the price? It was steep. Nobody walked away unscathed. Consequences for Vito Corleone. Vito's refusal to back Sollozzo's narcotics proposal set the wheels of conflict in motion. Sollozzo, recognizing Vito as an obstacle, orchestrated an assassination attempt to remove him from power. Though Vito survived the attack, it left him gravely injured and temporarily incapacitated, creating a power vacuum within the Corleone family. This incident marked a significant moment of vulnerability for Vito, undermining his position as the unshakable head of the family. The attempt on his life forced Vito to rely on others to manage the family's affairs while he recovered. This disruption highlighted the fragility of his carefully maintained empire. Despite his personal suffering, Vito's later actions, including brokering a truce among the families, showed his capacity for strategic retreat to ensure the survival of the Corleone family. This retreat allowed him to pave the way for his son Michael to take control, demonstrating Vito's ability to think long-term, even under immense pressure. Consequences for the Corleone family. The fallout from the assassination attempt destabilized the Corleone family. With Vito unable to lead, Sonny Corleone's impulsive and aggressive leadership style took center stage. While Sonny's approach demonstrated the family's willingness to fight, it also escalated the conflict, leading to decisions such as the ambush of Bruno Tattaglia. These moves deepened the war between the Corleones and the Tattaglias, creating significant internal and external pressures. Perhaps the most profound consequence was the transformation of Michael Corleone. Initially an outsider to the family business, Michael's decision to assassinate Sollozzo and Captain McCluskey marked his full immersion into the criminal underworld. This act not only avenged the attempt on Vito's life, but it also solidified Michael's place as the heir to the Corleone empire. The family's trajectory shifted, with Michael's cold and calculated leadership style ensuring their eventual dominance, albeit at a great personal and moral cost. Consequences for Sollozzo. Sollozzo's ambitious plans hinged on gaining the Corleone family's support for his narcotics operation. Vito's rejection of the proposal weakened Sollozzo's position, as he was unable to leverage the Corleone's political connections to protect his venture. This failure led Sollozzo to escalate the situation by ordering a hit on Vito, a decision that sparked an all-out war. The assassination attempt backfired spectacularly. Sollozzo's miscalculation of the Corleone's resolve led to his demise. Michael's assassination of Sollozzo and McCluskey at the restaurant was a decisive and symbolic act, signaling that the Corleone family, despite their temporary vulnerability, remained a formidable force. Sollozzo's short-sightedness and failure to anticipate the Corleone family's response ultimately cost him his life and ensured the collapse of his plans. The broader impact. The consequences of this meeting rippled far beyond the individuals directly involved. For Vito, it marked the beginning of the end of his reign and the transition of power to Michael. For the Corleone family, it set into motion a transformation that would redefine their approach to power and survival. This encounter wasn't just a turning point for the characters, it reshaped the entire power structure of the mafia world and set the stage for the events of the Godfather saga. It is a stark reminder of how decisions made in a single moment can echo for years, altering destinies and reshaping empires. The Barzini factor. Now, there's one key factor we haven't touched on yet, the involvement of the cunning wolf, the true mastermind, Don Emilio Barzini. He's the shadow behind the scenes, the one pulling the strings and setting traps with the kind of precision that only a true strategist can execute. Once you realize how deep this gets, you'll never see the Godfather films the same way ever again. And let's be honest, Barzini gives us an equal, if not better, masterclass in the game of power. His moves are subtle, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. To fully break down his hidden power plays and the 48 laws of power he executes so masterfully, we need an entire video. So if you want to gain the kind of insights that give you a powerful advantage over your competition, make sure you're subscribed to the Culture Mafia and turn on those notifications. Barzini's strategies aren't just lessons, they're weapons, and once you learn how to use them, there's no telling how far ahead you'll get.